Hi there, I'm Rosemary Barton. Here's what's at issue this week. A push for answers after a wave of leaks. Foreign interference in Canadian elections was the focus at a parliamentary committee where security and government officials testified about allegations China attempted to influence the past two elections. This week, the election review panel said the last vote was not compromised, but the Commissioner of Elections says her agency is reviewing complaints of wrongdoing.
This review is ongoing as I speak to determine whether there's any tangible evidence of wrongdoing under the Canada Elections Act.
But the highest-ranking official at Foreign Affairs warned against taking intelligence at face value.
Until it gets leaked and is then taken out of context. For example, a report from a single, uncorroborated source. If that report instantly becomes taken as fact, this can actually be prejudicial to Canada's national security.
In his first public statement on the leaks, the head of the Canadian Intelligence Service says it takes threats of interference seriously, but cannot jeopardize its work.
I would say that the bread and butter of an intelligence organization is our ability to collect secrets.
So, what's to be made of the latest testimony from officials? What do we still not know about interference in our elections? Let's bring in at issue. Althea Raj is here, Andrew Coyne. Chantal is away this week, so Émilie Nicolas from Le Devoir is pinch hitting for her. Good to see everybody. Thank you for being here. So we have, I would suggest, learned more this week than we knew last week between the report that was issued on the last election and these parliamentary committee hearings. Althea, what in your mind is important that we have learned and sort of helps us better understand what's going on?
Well, first of all, the 2021 election report came out, so we learned that the review found that the panel was right not to warn Canadians that nothing had met the threshold to warn a public that there was foreign interference in the election that would affect the outcome of the election. And then we have had it's almost a little bit like the public emergency inquiry that we are seeing an inside peek into government. So Jody Thomas yesterday, the Prime Minister's National Security Advisor, and today I think the most interesting and significant person was Mr. Morrison, the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, who sat on that committee as well, but who also kind of put in perspective the tidbits that we are getting from the CSIS leaks in the Globe and Mail and through Global's television's reporting. And to me, the takeaway was we don't really actually know anything. Like, we know what the party's positions are and their positioning and how they're trying to frame the issue. But when it comes down to it, intelligence is a little bit like our work, journalism. You know, you hear a rumor and then you try to corroborate it and you get multiple sources to corroborate it. But if you have that first single leak is just one source telling you something and you haven't verified that, that's basically the intelligence that we're seeing, that we may be seeing. I should add a caveat because we don't actually know, just briefly, to put this in perspective, we got from the American, the Energy Department, intelligence saying they have low confidence that the coronavirus came from the Wuhan lab. But they caveated that by saying there was low confidence in that report. We don't know the quality of the intelligence that we're getting or whether there are agendas at play. So really, we don't really know much.
So Andrew, what in your mind was helpful or not helpful then about all the things that we got in terms of more information this week?
Well, I'm not sure I agree we got that much more information. Certainly, for the most part, the witnesses in front of the committee have done their best to say as little as possible, as opaquely as possible, when they're not being interrupted and badgered by the committee members. So we're seeing the limitations of the committee process.
Right.
But that report on the report, on the panel, it didn't really tell us anything we didn't already know. Nobody has suggested that there was interference on a scale that would have altered the election outcome. That's never been the issue. So to have it confirmed that it didn't doesn't really add to our sum total knowledge. The concern is that there was interference of any kind that might have affected one or more riding levels. That's serious enough in itself. And yes, nobody's saying we should go off and arrest anybody or fire anybody strictly on the basis of the intelligence we received or that's been leaked out. I would quibble with the idea that it's just a scrap or a sliver here and there. It's multiple reports based upon multiple documents and presentations to the government. Now, whether they reached to the Prime Minister, we don't know, but it's been going on for years based upon dozens of CSIS reports that were distilled into memos, for example, from the Prime Minister's own national security advisor. That's not, as I say, enough to go off and make final decisions. It is certainly, it seems to me, enough to warrant further inquiries, which is all that anybody's really suggesting.
Yeah, you certainly end up with not all your questions answered at this point in the week, Emily. What about you?
I'd say that last week we thought we knew more because of the Globe and Mail and the Globe. What's been put in context this week is maybe what we know more this week is we know that we don't know. We know the value of the information we received last week that was leaked to the media. We are better equipped to put that into perspective and to understand that intelligence and facts are two different things, and that the threshold for proving what's in an intelligence report is not the same as those are the facts. We understand that better. There's been, and we also know that there are some things that are going to be hard to know as members of the public. Right. And we've seen that with the, some CSIS people being very, very careful about even the idea of a public inquiry, just the idea that you can have that information out there, and that in and of itself, the transparency in some cases, not in and of itself being a threat to national security. I think there's been some more explanation on that this week that's make it that there's a demand for transparency, but we also, I think, understand better why it's going to be tricky for some people to actually just say what they know. Yeah. And so I don't know if we know more, but we know more about how knowledge works. The thing that I sort of took away from it, though, is also the gap that exists, that seems to exist between the intelligence that is being recovered and looked at and is being leaked to media, and then action. Like what is actually happening with that intelligence? Did that strike you, Althea, as sort of an issue? Because the RCMP says they've done nothing, like they haven't gone after or investigated anyone.
Yeah, I will answer that. But I just want to say something to Andrew's point, because one thing that we learned today was that there was, or the people on the panel believed that there was nothing that affected the outcome of any riding in the country. Yeah. And that is significant because a lot of the leaks that we have seen seem to suggest that there may have been enough interference to sway the election in one riding or another, or more than one, actually. I thought the caveats around the quality of the CSIS leaks was really interesting, and I'm not convinced. Maybe Andrew has seen the documents. I have not. So obviously, I'm just an outside observer, taking this with a grain of salt. But I don't know if the information was hearsay based on a new source, or if it was intelligence that has been multiple, that has multiple sources have used it. We don't know the quality of the intelligence, but we obviously know, and the public servants who are nonpartisan, who spent years working on this, are telling us that there is more interference and we need to pay more attention to it. And I think what all of this has brought to the surface is that we probably need our elected officials, but also people, the RCMP, CSIS, the Commissioner of Elections Canada, the Chief Electoral Officer, to speak to us more openly, more candidly, more often about what they're doing and what we're facing. And we haven't had that conversation for about 10 years in this country, not since I think Dick Fadden spoke to Peter Mansbridge on this network, to have these discussions.
Andrew.
I haven't seen the documents either, I'll be clear on that. But what we do know is two things. One is these were not, what was leaked was not something off of some junior officer's desk in a file cabinet somewhere. These were documents, these were reports that were prepared in the Privy Council, that were prepared in the National Security Intelligence Advisor. They were meant to be seen by the highest level of government. People at high levels of the insurance community, the intelligence community would have to have signed off on this. So they're not going to do that for just anything. They must have had enough confidence in this that they would push it.
But they testified today that they do. Deputy Minister Morrison said that he likes the fact that he can get these rumors because it paints a picture of what possible actions they may need to take later on.
I'm not saying they're conclusive. I'm just saying they're not just scraps of paper. Somebody thought they were sufficient to pass on to the Prime Minister and senior levels of the government. Secondly, whoever is leaking them is taking an enormous risk in doing so. They are risking prison sentences. So they must take this pretty seriously to want to do that. Doesn't mean they're necessarily right, doesn't mean their motives are pure, but they certainly think there's something serious going on here. So again, all anyone should take from this is this warrants further inquiry, not that we're going to make any conclusions or lock anybody up.
Emily, last word to you on this part.
Well, there's also a difference between the intelligence that the government is getting and the information that's circulating. For example, in the Chinese Canadian communities in Canada, there's been a lot of experts who've come out in the last days saying that there's been a lot of worries in those communities across the country already for years, and that when people are trying to speak up to that and reach out to the government and actually share intelligence on that, there's been some issues as well in terms of gathering that information. So that's also a point in terms of, there's the information that the government has, but there's also a lot of things that some parts of the population have in terms of information that's hasn't reached the government yet.
Welcome back to another round of At Issue. Is political partisanship preventing Canadians from getting the answers they need? Despite the release of an independent report and a committee looking into election interference, calls for a public inquiry are growing from the Leader of the Opposition.
Conservatives are announcing today we support an independent and public inquiry.
Two members of the committee investigating election interference.
Calls on the Government of Canada to launch a national public inquiry into allegations of foreign interference in Canada's democratic system.
The Prime Minister points to the efforts already underway to deal with it.
One of the most important things to remember is we have an awful lot of mechanisms that are underway right now around determining what kind of foreign interference has happened, is continuing to happen, and demonstrating the tools we have.
So do we need a public inquiry into foreign election interference? How is the government handling this? Let's bring everyone back. Althea, Andrew, and Émilie Nicolas from Le Devoir joins us. Chantal is away. Andrew, what do you think of this growing call for a public inquiry? Do you think there's any value to it, or is there something else that we should be looking at?
Well, we don't need a public inquiry into foreign interference. We know that the foreign interference is going on. I don't think anybody disputes that the government of China is trying it. Yeah. We don't need a public inquiry to formulate policy to counter it. That's what governments are for. Where we might need a public inquiry is not so much the foreign interference part of it as the domestic complicity part, which is to say that what is really scalding that comes out of these intelligence reports, again, don't have to take them at face value, but they are suggestive, is the involvement of domestic actors either passively enabling this by simply turning a blind eye to repeated reports that there was serious interference going on, that is to say, senior members of the government, and or actively participating, which is the allegation against certain members of the Liberal Party in particular, and including taking cash donations from the Chinese government, in some cases wittingly, in some cases unwittingly, all of which adds up to that's the part that really requires a public inquiry, because essentially you're talking about members of the ruling party, the governing party. And we don't necessarily want the government investigating itself, and we don't want Liberals investigating Liberals. To the extent that there's a palpable conflict of interest there, that's when you need something like a public inquiry to ensure that the truth comes out.
Althea?
I'm really worried that the accusations that are being lobbed, especially by the Conservatives, are painting a distorted picture of what the actual reporting is suggesting, and it's going to create more harm. It's going to do more harm than any positive thing that could come out of this. Like that clip that you used of Pierre Poilievre earlier this week. In that speech, he also basically suggested that Justin Trudeau is a puppet of China and has been doing, has been bought for and paid for the last 10 years by the Chinese government. The questions from Conservative MPs today at nonpartisan officials, basically not listening to what the evidence is and just trying to get that clip that they can promote on social media. There's already so many people in this country that believe conspiracy theories, and now we're going to just put little snippets of information. Like, I feel like that is the danger of not having a serious forum where this can be discussed. And I too am not convinced a public inquiry is really valuable, because the information that really needs to come out is the stuff that's classified.
Sure.
So is that a judicial inquiry? I mean, I think the Prime Minister's suggestion, frankly, of the the committee of parliamentarians of all parties who are sworn to top secret clearance, they might have actually better questions to ask our elected officials, our security officials, because political parties often are run by volunteers, and I don't know that they have the expertise to know whether or not China is giving a bribe to a member of the Canadian Chinese community, to a candidate of their choosing. Like, there are so many problems that I think this has uncovered. I'm not sure a public inquiry is going to give us the answers that we need, and also it's really costly. So clearly there are other mechanisms possibly that we could use.
Emily?
Public forum, I like the word that I just used in the sense that there needs to be something done that's nonpartisan, but there is a lot of experts who are disagreeing right now, and especially in the last days, on the format, given how difficult it is, as we were just saying, to say some things in public. And so I would not go to battle for one specific format, but the fact that there needs to be some nonpartisan forum in which we look at this seems to be very important. And I just want to stress how, with the poll that just came out from Angus Reid about how people already believe, a significant number of Canadians already believe that the last elections were stolen. The speed at which misinformation travels in this day and age is incredibly dangerous, and we've lost already days of the government trying to defend actually the mechanisms that are already in place. I think if Justin Trudeau had from day one said, this is really worrisome and here's what we're going to do, I think the impact would have been very different on that poll that we just had. The fact that it's dragged on for days, even if the government starts to switch gears and look at some nonpartisan venue for this, it might actually even be too late in terms of how this might impact the trust of some Canadians into our election system, and that to me is very, very, very worrisome.
Andrew, I'll give you the last word here.
I think, to me, the issue is not so much whether it's public as it's independent. So I understand some of the security implications, and you don't want to have everything out in the open, but what you want is a process that can't be tied up in knots by the Liberals. What we've seen in the past with other scandals is the party stonewalls, it barracks, it prevents things from going forward, and I worry that may be where we'll head with this as well.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Thank you, everyone. I'm sure we'll talk about it again. Appreciate it.